Welcome to Café Technika.
Hello. This is Tom Roberto, your Technology Shaman. Thanks for listening to another episode of Café Technika. Today, I have Colby with me. He comes to me through various friends in the industry, and I think we're going to have an excellent conversation today because he's got very unique takes on the technology business and business in general. Colby, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so Colby, I've been in technology for almost 20 years in a variety of different forms on the OEM side, system integrator side, big companies, small companies, anywhere in between, and just been helping clients navigate the ever-changing world of technology. So nice to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, it is ever changing, right? Like our world never seems to stay the same or stay still for even a couple of minutes, does it?
Nope, not at all. I mean, you think you got things sorted out, and then you flip the page to another day, and Palo Alto's acquired CyberArk, or SentinelOne's acquired Prompt Security. After it's just being in business for a year, it's crazy. So
It is crazy. Everything kind of moved. So talk to me about like your career path. How did you get here? What were some of the unexpected things that happened? Because I feel like everybody's got a unique way that they got into this space. It's not like anybody leaves high school saying, that's what I want to do with my life.
yeah, no, that couldn't have been more accurate for me. I mean, believe it or not, I started out as a scientist. So I started in technology. I was in high school. I was one of those kids that was just had a penchant for science, and I was always in like AP biology in sophomore year and whatever. But I was fortunate enough that I had a friend that ran a lab at the National Cancer Institute. So I got a couple years in a fellowship when I was in high school doing cancer research. I got published when I was 18, so that was super cool. And now I went to college to be a chemist. So I was gonna go down that path, but I was fortunate enough as well in my high school years that I got to go to Europe for 3.5 weeks in my junior year. And the second year I went to the National Cancer Institute, they were all up for their grant approvals and stuff. So scientists weren't sharing information, and it was just kind of cutthroat and not really what I thought technology, or excuse me, science was all about. It didn't really strike the altruistic sort of vein I was looking for. So
Oh, yeah.
I just went to college to try to figure out what I wanted to do, and I went a semester late because I broke my wrist playing hockey, and I just started taking basic liberal arts classes and got really interested in philosophy and English of all things. And I was gonna go to law school, and then my 21-year-old brain, starting school a semester late and thinking I needed to get into the workforce, I raced to get out of college and did 47 credits my last two semesters, and I thought law school I have an aneurysm or something. So I got out of that, and I just started working in sales actually to pay some bills, and I ended up being pretty good at it. And after selling Verizon phone lines door to door in inner city Baltimore, I thought I probably could make more money doing something else, and I got aligned with a recruiter, and I got an inside sales interview with a company in Annapolis, Maryland called Netcordia, which was super cool network configuration change management software. It was created by the first CCIE outside of Cisco, so it was CCIE number 1001, and I worked up through that, and we were acquired by Infoblox in 2010. So that took me out to the West Coast, and I lived out in San Francisco for 3 years, and worked for Infoblox until 2015, and then wanted to get back into the startup space. So I did some other startups with my first manager and sold a lot of different SaaS technologies, mobile backend as a service, database as a service. And then I decided I'd do a different challenge, and I got aligned with Dimension Data. And, and I was there for 5 years, and a lot of exposure to services, managed services, also kind of some of the bad things about big companies, like farmed out all of our back office to India, and customer service went downhill a bit. So I pivoted back to a smaller firm for 3 years, and kind of got mostly focused on the private equity space and a lot of the challenges around private equity backed heavy M&A companies that are integrating 3, 4, 5 10 companies over 2 to 3 years and all the pitfalls around that. So
Yeah.
really helping people kind of standardize that process around collaboration, networking equipment, security, all of those things. And then that's kind of what I'm doing now. And I'm doing that on my own now. So I got a bunch of connections in the PE world, and we just rinse and repeat that same model and help them build up platforms to then allow the PE firm to monetize those companies. So
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, like the trajectory and the arc is very unique, right? Like nobody ever suspects how you get there. What was the moment that you knew this is what you wanted to do? Like, was there anything that stood out where you're like, I really love this because of that moment or because of, that company?
um it's interesting, both sales and technology. And I think, you know, you can make a pretty good living, and if you're in sales and you're hitting your numbers and stuff, you have, a fair amount of autonomy to run your day to day. And really the cornerstone of me, like, I was an English and philosophy major, so everyone else joked that I just didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to live in the south of France and wear a tweed jacket with leather packet and from Cobb Pipe,
Yeah,
but I think what's really interesting about sales and technology is it's problem solving, right? And it's a lot of stuff. Like, I was a cancer researcher, and you're doing a lot of research for your clients. Like, what's the cutting edge technology? These things that are coming out that it's honestly a full-time job for an IT staff to keep up on everything going on in the technology world. So, as you get that trust with clients and can, be that advisor for them, then you can go out and do that research for them. And, so it kind of speaks to that kind of, I want to help people. I want to help them solve problems. I want to help, watch businesses grow and enable that. And that's kind of, what I look at technology being is how do we help move businesses forward? I'll never forget when I was back at NetCordia. um, our VP of Ops was from Pittsburgh, so we were pitching to Heinz Ketchup. He's got a big room full of all, like, the IT guys and everything. And the VP of IT stood up and he said, "I'll buy your product right now if you can tell me how it's going to help us sell more ketchup." And that's honestly all they care about. Like, technology is an enablement for what the business is doing, but, you know, the company itself is just figuring out how do they increase EBITDA and how do they drive more of their product out the door, and how does technology fit into that. And, that's a really interesting concept to have to grapple with, because big or small company doesn't matter. They're trying to solve for the same thing. So that's kind of,
yeah.
you know,
No, it's amazing how many people come from like either like a science or an art background that then get into technology. I've had several people on the podcast now where they came from either a scientific or a theater music background, and it sort of led to them saying, technology is a great way. And we all sort of say the same thing. It's about problem solving, people skills, but like it's really about all the non-technical stuff that drives us into the space, and the technology is kind of like the fuel in the engine, but you really got to be driven by something else. So I find it very interesting, like, the genesis of how you get there, and like you've got such a different background. I mean, being that you're in the tech space, right? Like, how do you keep the technology from running your life, right? Because you're dealing with it on a day-to-day, but again, like your background and your motivations are very non-technical. So like how do you keep that balance?
a couple of ways. I surround myself with not technologists, first of all. So, like, my family, my partner, my friends around me, none of them are in technology. They're plumbers or, school teachers or what have you. So if I start talking technology to them, they look at me like I'm an alien, and it's not really that entertaining at a cocktail party. So it's great. So I can leave technology at the door when I, have my last meeting for the day with clients. And I also actively disengage from technology. So I'm not one of those
Yeah.
uber technology connected all the time. Like, I go on vacation, I turn off my email. Like, I have one day a week where I don't even take my phone out with me. You really have to, actively disengage from technology, or else it literally will consume your life when you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Look, nothing says I want to leave the conversation like a bunch of technology people talking tech, right? I feel like that when I walk into the sports conversations, and I'm like, dude, this is not for me. It's very much the same. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So you do like a day a week where you just like put the phone away and stuff. Tell me more about that. I'm always intrigued by stuff like that.
I literally I disable everything other than emergency calls. So like
Really?
so yeah, like if it's like whatever the 8 people are in my contact list that need to get in touch with me for some emergency, but other than that, everything else gets silenced for one day a week. Um, I usually do it on Sunday, and it you come back energized on the Monday because you have a clear head and you can catch up on Monday morning. I always tell people nothing is so important that it has to be answered like immediately. And I feel like
100%.
in technology, if you don't disengage, like it's you're due for a nervous breakdown. Like
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
when I go on I used to go on our president's clubs and stuff. I would always go in a couple days early because not to have to do all the corporate stuff all the time. And a couple years ago, my old boss at the time showed up, and I had been there for 3 days, and they found me wherever I was on the property because I didn't have my phone. And we're walking back through the casino. We were in the Bahamas, and I'm like, I got to go back to my room. He's like, why? I was like, I got to get my phone. I mean, now everyone's here. I got to be able to communicate. Yeah. Your phone for 3 days? Like, I'm like, no, I'm on vacation. What about like, you know, that's why your backup. If it's important, go talk to my manager. Like, he knows what's going on. Like, leave me alone. I'll talk to you next Monday.
That's so funny. It's true though. But like, so does that extend into other areas? So like, again, I talked to somebody on my last show that they were a big proponent of like moleskin notebooks and writing things down and stuff. Like, do you have any offline methods that have stuck with you now where you've got like unplugged thinking time at work and you would attribute that to maybe some success?
Yeah, I'm a big runner, like an avid distance runner. So that's my time to think. That's how I get the clarity for my day. I don't like a lot of people that run and stuff. They always have AirPods in and stuff. Like I don't even run with any music and it's just literally my meditative time and that allows me to I don't write it down obviously then, but everything that I've been working through, that's kind of my problem solving time. And it's another outlet from technology, but it's
Yeah, almost like a monotask like thinking session where you're just like, all right, I need to just, kind of brain dump, and get it all out. That's interesting. Nobody's ever said that before but that's very interesting. Like I sympathize with that listening to music. Like, you kind of just your brain starts to like unload, right? You work through all those little problems that are stuck up there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That's really cool. So how do you feel about AI? Like, is that a friend, a foe, a multiplier? Like now everybody's talking about AI, and being you're in the PE space, I can't even imagine how many times that comes up now, right? So like, how's that impacting you?
I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what to do with AI. And there's so many it's become so immersed in our day to day so quickly that I feel like a little bit some of these companies are getting a little bit ahead. There's probably going to be like some sort of a correction, I think, just how quickly they've run. But
Yeah.
it's kind of everyone's like, oh, AI is going to replace, all of these people and jobs are being lost and so forth and so on. And I listened to this. He's a professor at Vanderbilt University that did like this mini AI class on LinkedIn that I listened to, and I think if people to look at AI not as like this big gorilla gremlin terrible thing in the room, but as a tool, then it can be really, really powerful in what you can extract from a data perspective and how that can help anyone in any kind of business. Like the example he was giving is, he had a finicky eater son and he needed to create this really, intricate dietary regime and stuff like that. And it was just through a series of prompts that he could talk with the AI agent. And in 35 minutes, he could create this super curated, like precise, taking all of his allergic like conditions into account, and produce this weekly menu for his 7-year-old son that would have taken months and
Yeah.
countless
Yeah.
doctor's appointments and dietitians and everything to accomplish, and he was able to get it done in 35 minutes. Same thing, as we're now in technology, and you want to, my job as a salesperson, the biggest challenge is how do you find the clients that need help, and how do you use AI that they can help you curate, those kinds of profile customers, and understand things that, with today's day and age, you go through Zoom Info or all these other things, and the data is, marginal at best. But when you filter in AI on top of it, it can really help you, filter through that, and make you as an individual a lot more productive than you could otherwise be. So, I think a lot of people are scared of it, but when you sit and look at it, it's here now, it's here to stay, and we have to figure out kind of how we work within the bounds and control it, so it doesn't become like, like 1984 or something. But
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the example of like dietary things, because I actually did a seminar with a school district, and one of the things that sparked their interest the most about using AI was coming up with dietary plans for like the lunch, like the lunch staff and the people that will work. And I was like, this is such an odd area for this to come up, but it almost seems like that stuff takes a lot of time, and like that's an area that I don't think anybody's looking at, right? Like I haven't heard anybody in that space where they're like, yeah, we're using it for this. Like maybe it seems like it always comes up now. Like I'm seeing it more and more, and it's like, wow, that's an interesting use case. I mean, so you're in and around PE firms, and this always comes up. Like, is there an unpopular opinion that industry holds that maybe like you wish people would admit is true, but nobody wants to talk about it? Is there like what's the kryptonite there that nobody wants to admit and own up to as you're in that space?
I think the biggest thing with the PE firms is PE firms typically at the sponsorship level, they don't want to admit that they need to spend money on technology to scale and protect their business, right? So it's getting to that point where you're needing to convince the PE sponsors that, no, I know you don't feel like you need to spend, $350,000 to put some security in place around your workers, but I can guarantee you, if you get hacked and ransomware, like the hackers aren't going to ask you for $15,000 to get your data back.
Right.
They're gonna leverage you to the tilt, and specifically in the part of the PE firms that I've been working with the most, well, last 10 years, is what these PE firms, and specifically the BD guys, they're going out and they're buying small tuck in and acquisitions, creating a big platform, but those small acquisitions are not prepared for an enterprise scale business and platform. So, they're usually on their own businesses. They're anywhere from 10 to 75 employees. They usually have off the shelf commercial security and routers, and no standardization, no process. They're usually on QuickBooks. They don't have any kind of cloud enabled sort of ERP system. And, where I have come in is to help them kind of navigate and put all that together, and then build up that platform to then be sold. But it's getting the PE guy to understand that, yeah, you guys have acquired 9 different companies, and half of them are on Google Workspace and half of them are Microsoft, and you guys don't have collaboration platform, and what are you going to do? So
Right.
yeah.
God, I wish I would have had this conversation with you 2 years ago, because I was living and breathing that. And like, I feel like, I don't know if you agree with this, but like, I often get the sense, because it's interesting you say that. First off, like, I don't think that's something popular that people, that are out of that world understand. But I also think it's like, it's a complexity problem, right? Like, I think sometimes when it's hard to understand, because technology is so complex, when it's hard to understand, I don't think people want to part with money, or they part with money for the wrong reasons, right? Like there's all this integration and software development that goes out, and you go, but is that really benefiting the business, or should we be looking at these other areas, right? Like I almost get the sense that if you can simplify things for for PE guys, but also for those businesses, right? that they'll be more willing to listen to the conversation, and that it usually gets lost in the complexity of the conversation. A lot of technology people end up losing that conversation because it's like, well, I don't actually understand what this is, right? Like, do you agree with that, or do you think there's like any way that's secret to kind of simplify this stuff, or like what how are you having those conversations?
You know, my my whole bet is I don't like aligning to technologies. I like aligning to like the challenge and then presenting different solutions to X client on how they could potentially solve that challenge. And I act as the middleman to help connect them to whatever we decide on is actually the best fit for that business. But you know, um, they they just simply need to realize that like they have to deal with these challenges. You know, like
Yeah.
you can't just like put your head in the sand and decide that you don't want to deal with it because it's complex and it's expensive or might be expensive, but
Yeah.
finding the right analogy that they relate to, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's about communication, right?
my sister, as an example, she has never understood what I do, and she really kind of flippantly tells people like, you know, I don't know, but he makes more money than me or something like that, you know. And I said to her like the other day, she likes to drink wine, and I said, Ashley, you know, your friend Holly, she works, you know, at a wine distributor, and you go and you get wine from her, and she has this whole portfolio of different wine providers. You're not going to go and talk to each of those providers and, you know, directly contract with them. You go through the wine distributor. And she's like, yeah, that's right. I was like, what's the same thing with me? Instead of wine, it's technology. So like a client needs to go and find someone that can help them build out this platform or the technology they need across collaboration, network security, you know, in some cases contact center, you name it. And they're not gonna go and just do that directly. So they need someone that can act as that middleman, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, look, I think I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit because I think it's pertinent to what we're kind of getting into. And I mean, you're dealing with startups, you're dealing with small businesses, these platform style businesses. Um, as we look at AI and technology and like that kind of thing, there's also like a generational dynamics that goes into that, right? The people that are now starting businesses that are working there, like as you're working with these fast rolling businesses, and you're dealing with people that might be new in their career, like what do you see? Are there any red flags or any things that you're excited about? Like how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to look at kind of 5 to 10 years out for all these people that are now, you know, growing up like, you know, I think you and I are kind of similar age brackets. So like we actually were born like before the internet started and like then,
It's my whole thing. Yeah, it's my whole thing.
but now we have like, you know, the last generation, they like 100% grew up in the internet. And then this generation is going to 100% grow up in the AI world. And I think already they're dealing with it like at colleges and stuff around just like ethics, you know, like, did you really write this paper? Or did you just like go to Chat GPT and be like, hey, I read Catcher in the Rye and I need a 5-page paper on Catcher in the Rye, you know? So like, I think that's going to be interesting to grapple with, kind of, you know, as how we are going to be teaching our kids and things in the next 5, 10 years, and how technology is going to play a role in that. In terms of, you know, the businesses, I think everyone's playing around with AI. Some are a lot more, you know, forward thinking. A lot of the things that I've been working with the last 3 to 5 years, you know, they're more in like the trade space, and they're going out and they're buying all of these founder owned, you know, plumbing businesses or HVAC businesses and things. So they're not quite as forward thinking from adopting AI as, you know, other people that are more like a SaaS company or something like that. Like they might be using AI for, you know, note taking as an example or something.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think is going to be exciting the next, you know, 5 to 10 years is just kind of what the world of work looks like when all of these people are coming out and it's just AI, you know, like it's
Yeah.
kind of, I kind of equate it. I used to work with Autodesk, like CAD software and so forth. when AutoCAD, and then like when they started doing 3D modeling with Revit and stuff, that was like a really monumental shift in the architecture engineering space, because the old draftsmen and architects, they were just like used to, pen and paper and whatever, and trying to get those guys to figure out like why would I use software when I can just draw it like I've always done. I think that's going to be the same kind of thing with AI in the next 5 to 10 years with these businesses, and I think that it'll probably accelerate and streamline more as more of the old guard are retiring, and these newer people that are immersed in it completely and just grew up with it. It's just going to be human nature to just integrate it into their workflows.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Is there any like, so you and I actually came to talk to each other because of a mentor of mine, Gary Paxton. And that's how you and I kind of got connected through him. But are there any like bosses, mentors, customers where like they gave you advice, maybe generationally different, that kind of stuck with you and taught you a core lesson that guides you still to this day? Like, is there anybody that you could point to, or a story that you have there?
I've had several business mentors over my life. My first CEO and my first technology company, he probably said the most thing that stuck with me the most as a sales guy, because we were young, and we would be at sales kickoffs and stuff, and all these younger like inside sales guys, they would always be talking about their funnel and their pipeline and like whatever, and he 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 was the first salesperson hired at Juniper Networks, like before they
Yeah.
before they even had a product. So like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when I met him, he was like just bored, so he came out of retirement. He was just doing this CEO thing at the startup, and and I think I was probably the same age as him when he got into technology, and he said to me, "Colby, I'm going to give you a few pieces of advice. Like, if your boss isn't talking business, neither are you, and whatever your boss is drinking, so are you." You know, what stuck with me is the people business. Everything's a people business. You need to be able to listen and relate to people, and kind of meet them where they are, and that's kind of what stuck with me. You have two ears and one mouth for a reason. So I've always kind of
Yeah, right.
first thought to understand, and then be understood second. That's kind of how I look at the world.
No, that's an excellent lesson. I have that conversation, weekly with people. But so in that same vein, like we've got Slack, you got Zoom, you got all this stuff, right? Like all this digital stuff that's invaded the culture, especially because of COVID and everything. It kind of accelerated that. Like, do you think that stuff has brought us closer, or do you think it's made collaboration harder?
Um, I think that all the collaboration software and so forth that kind of accelerated with the pandemic, by and large, I think has been a great thing, because you know I think it's been great for the environment, because we can do a lot more things virtually. So you don't have to get on planes, trains, and automobiles as much as we did pre-pandemic to interact and do business. People have gotten more comfortable with the collaboration platforms and so forth. So like from an economic or ecological and climate perspective, I think that that's great. I think that it does the piece that I think is not great about all the collaboration software is, and again, it was COVID was the driver of it, because you weren't going anywhere, so it just made you always available. So like no one had any
Yeah.
concern for your time any longer of checking if you were available before just throwing a meeting, on your calendar or something. So I think the bad piece out of all of these collaboration softwares is that it can get people to get burned out more than previous, because it's harder to disengage unless you do it actively, like I do sometimes, because
Yeah.
you're just always available and you can always be on. And it could be that you're sitting in the park and you're on your phone looking at a Zoom meeting or whatever. So I think that's the danger of it. But on balance, I think that it's been great, because it does allow people more flexibility in where they're working and how they're working. And, by and large, I think that is a good balance overall.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is going in the way of like, we've got too much quantity and not enough quality. I feel like that sometimes, but like, I feel like that's kind of where you're going with it. I mean, look, it is hard. Like you said, I was born in 1982. Like, I'm 42 years old. I know the world before the internet. That's my whole like, pitch when I'm out here doing this technology shaman thing. And I'm like, look, that is something that I think needs to be taught. And like, your old boss said, like it's a people business. So that's an offline skill, right? So I often ask people that are from that generation though, because now we are getting a little older. And it's like, be honest, do you still feel like you're in touch with what's trending? And like, how are you doing that? Or do you think it's harder and harder as we age? Like, I feel like every generation deals with that, but like we're a unique generation. How do you feel we're doing?
I mean, overall, I think that we're doing better than our parents' generation. And even and much better than my grandparents' generation. My mom's mother's really smart lady, but like she didn't grow up with technology. She was born in 1923. So when she got her first own cell phone, I was sitting there on the couch with her, and she like took a phone call, and she like then turned off the cell phone, and I was like, Graham, you're not gonna get the call back. Like the phone's on. It's you know. I think that our generation is in a good place because we did bridge that gap, so we can kind of like. I think that we'll be better at keeping abreast of technology, just because for our formative years, it was so immersed in from like when
Mhm.
95 to the present. Like we've had to deal with so many new technologies coming out that we probably are going to be a little bit better at adapting than our parents. But who knows what will happen in the next 10 years, and maybe in the next 50 years you and I will be the ones like where we're like trying to go find an old tape recorder or something like that.
I often think of a guy I used to work with. His name was Frank, and he always used to say to me, he's like, trust me, you will become the guy at work where you're like that old person, right? And I think of it all the time, and I'm like, every day I get closer to that, and I'm like, I gotta get out there. I gotta it's almost the purpose for doing these types of things, because you learn so much by talking to people. So I find it is hard, but you're right. Like, we grew up with it, so we're probably a lot more hip than previous generations. But I often look at the people coming up now, and they probably look at us as the old timers. So
Yeah, but
um,
maybe that gives us a little bit more empathy for, my parents,
true.
our parents, and so forth. Like
Yeah, right. That's true. That's very true. So I'm always interested in kind of what makes people tick with stuff like this. Like, do you have any frameworks or like life leadership? Like, I'm a big follower of Simon Sinek and all those guys. And like, do you have one that stands out in your mind where like, yeah, this really sort of shapes what I do on a day to day? Like, what advice would you give people listening on any of those types of things, or teach me?
I'm always I think the thing that makes me good at understanding new technologies and kind of staying like abreast of things is I'm just innately an inquisitive, curious person. And I think that you know what I always try to do is I've read all of those books. You've read Stephen Covey and Seven Habits of
Yeah.
People, and Dale Carnegie and whatever. But I think that just genuinely being inquisitive, not for any profit or anything of that nature, but just trying to understand the person sitting across from you, and more importantly, what they do that makes them tick. I think that enables you to be more consultative in whatever you're talking to them about, whether that is technology or, whatever the case may be. But you can't like dogmatically, prescriptively go and kind of analyze someone before you understand, what they're all about, whether that's their business or that individual. So I would say I just always, like I said earlier in the thing, seek first to understand and then be understood. And I think, you
Yeah,
have
right.
more success. But
If you could go back 5 years ago, like, was there anything that maybe you had a very strong belief in that now you come up and you go, I realized I was completely wrong, and here's why? Like, have you had any of those aha moments?
um, I mean, I would think 5 years ago, what I would say to you, Tom, is that I was not as I was. I'll be candid. I was more of a jerk. you know, like I was just kind of like, I wouldn't say I was a know-it-all, but I was just kind of, I would just be jerky kind of sometimes. And,
Yeah.
and I fortunately, in a kind of back end way, but I got super, super sick during COVID. I developed a really rare esophageal condition, and I lost like 65 pounds, and I was literally like
Wow.
3 weeks from death, and like literally, I had to beg my uncle, who's a doctor, to get me into a specialist, and from that specialist meeting to surgery was 3 weeks. And in post op, he told my mom if I hadn't done that, that I would have been dead by the time I got to him. So, that's pretty
Wow.
sobering when you're 40 years old. That really was the biggest changing point in my life, because you just you've got that kind of, okay, does this matter? No, it doesn't. And it kind of helps you kind of look at life a little bit differently. And it certainly changed my outlook on just how I interact with people. And I think that's been certainly for the best. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, look, those situations, right? Like they really do change the course of your life. And I feel like, not only from a life skills perspective, but just from like how you live and what you like, what drives you. I feel like that greatly impacts you, right? Like that's awesome that you're doing well now with that. But like how like so that must have severely changed sort of where you wanted to go after that, right? Like, what was going to drive what you were going to do, how you were going to do it. Probably like I'm sure there's a different legacy that you want to leave behind now versus then, right? Like what's that today?
Well, I think what it did for me is, when you come that close to not being 6 feet above ground, then you kind of sit back and look around. And for professionally, for me, what it's allowed me to do is, I wake up every morning and I'm like, okay, like, is this the best place for me? And do I really like it? And so I just I don't tolerate like me being unhappy. So if I'm not happy with something, I find something else to do. And that's kind of the last 5 years how I've lived my life. And that's how ended up leaving NTT, and then that's how I ended up leaving my last firm, and why now, I'm just working for myself, because bigger's not always better. Like, where's the best
Mhm.
meal that you've always had? It's not going to be at the Olive Garden. It's probably like some hole in the wall, Italian restaurant in the North End or something like that. So, it's connecting with those people that you think you can help, and trying just to do the best by them, and not putting up with all of the noise that can consume people. Don't let yourself be consumed by that noise, because you might not have the next day.
No, look, that's an excellent, excellent, excellent advice. Like I think more people should think about like the ethics of what they're doing and their impact on the world. Because I feel like at the time you never realize what you're doing impacts so many other people. But then once you really look at that and you go, wow, I am the manager, I am the hiring person, right? Like I'm sure you've had moments where you were interviewing people or making decisions that were going to impact other people's lives. Like do you have any advice for people in those positions? Like, having, direct access to be able to control something like that. Like, what advice would you give them?
Well, again, this is where my philosophical life kind of comes into effect. And you know, I kind of became disillusioned with companies like NTT and stuff like that, because those businesses are driven by, profit and corporate level things to usually enrich, upper leadership. And people where I was at in those positions, like, they I both couldn't impact anything, and I was completely at the mercy of someone above me that really didn't care about me as an individual. While they might say they did, they didn't. I was just, on a spreadsheet or whatever. So now,
Sure.
the advice that I try to give people, and how I try to deal with my interactions, whatever that may be, with, if there's people that I'm working with that I hire into this company or whatever, I look at it kind of like harkening back to the Knights of the Round Table, and just treating people everywhere with equality, and meeting them in the middle, and trying to do right and fair by them. So, um, I think if more people were to transact and behave in that manner, then everyone would be a lot better off, because
No, look, I agree with you. And look, I think, I've had really bad experiences with companies and investments and things, but I've also had really good experiences. And I'm sure you'd agree, like having had the experience with a big company and now small companies, like there's enrichment on both sides, right? You would never be where you are today if it wasn't for the the things that the bigger companies can provide. And there's also, things with the smaller businesses that they provide. So I'm sure there's like benefits and drawbacks to those things. Like having done both, would you recommend to somebody starting out, like, hey, this is experience you definitely should have, and you should definitely do this or that or avoid those things? Like, how do you feel about that? Because I get the sense that, like, you're loving the small business life now. But I think having had experience on both sides, like, it's unique, right? Some people never get that experience. They're a number for their whole life, or they never actually have an opportunity to work for a bigger org. So you've seen both. Like, what do you think is good?
I mean, yeah, no, I was super, super fortunate in my career. Like, you know, my first technology company getting acquired, and then working for Infoblocks, and watching that whole journey from, a startup to going IPO, and then everything around that. Like, that was probably one of the best business educations I could ever get, so, I would tell people, yeah, like, do do a variety of different work things. And small companies are great, especially if you get into a startup technology. It gets super energizing, and like you're bringing a product to market, and it's cutting edge, and that's like really, really mentally stimulating and educating. But then big companies, NTT, for all of the negatives of NTT, that exposed me to the whole, like, complete managed services business, and all the challenges around that, and how businesses need that help as well. So, like, there's certainly good and bad with small and big companies. So yeah, you just got to find where you fit. And what I've kind of learned in my career is that, I operate better in a nimble, fast moving, like, kind of, flat organization, instead of, one now where you've got multiple different layers of hierarchy, and it's tougher to get things done. Because at the end of the day, me as a, a salesperson, you're out there in front of the client, and all you really want to do is what's right by them. And sometimes it's hard to do when you got a lot of bureaucratic red tape at a big company. It's much easier to make decisions, when you're a small company. But but it's also it's a lot riskier, because, NTT is not going to go out of business. They might be inefficient, but they're not going to go out of business. So,
Yeah.
so
Well, and look, I think companies like that, to your point, they get you into things where only big boys are playing, right? Like, I remember the first time I walked into a room, and it was filled with people from Cisco. And, when you walk into rooms like that, you can immediately tell the mood changes, and you're like, wow, this is playing on a different field. Like, it isn't, I'm not used to this, right? I even had a customer at Fidelity for a long time, and even just getting to their offices, like, you're like, I'm playing on a different field now. So, like, having had that experience, I feel like, to your point, like, it exposes you to things that you'd probably never get access to. And just like anything, like, there's the underbelly of everything, right? So it's like, to operate at that level, there's bad for sure, right?
Yep.
Same thing goes for these small businesses. Like, I'm a small business guy, and I feel like, when you work for a small business, there's the underbelly of that too, where you go like, that's terrifying when you finally realize what it is.
yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah. Certainly. Yeah. To your point, if we're working for a big company, that gets you into a lot bigger firms. So you just kind of got to
Mm.
balance that against what you want to do for your career and for your life. And for me, that was going back to the smaller, companies. So maybe I'm not gonna, call on a 25,000 person company, but, am I gonna have the quality of life that I want? And the answer is yeah. And that's what's really important to me.
Yeah, listen, I also get a lot of fun out of being like David and Goliath, right? It's always fun to chase the big things
Yep.
and be the small guy, because it's that much more exciting, Like, um, so we're kind of wrapping up here, but, like, if I was to give you a billboard in Times Square for 24 hours, what would you put on it? Like, what do you want to get out there? Is there any kind of shameless plug that you can give yourself, emotional or hilarious kind of things for everybody to listen to? Like, what do you want out there?
Yeah. Well, my company is Sidekick IT, and the real genesis of it is everyone needs a sidekick. Heroes have a sidekick, and in the technology business world, businesses need the same thing. So they need someone that they can bounce ideas off of. They need someone that can help them find things that are in their wheelhouse or what their day to day is. And that's kind of where we fit in. So we work in the center of technology and clients to help them, identify, vet technologies, to procure them, to implement and manage them, and then support them around that. So we kind of do that in a completely agnostic way. So I have access to 600 plus different providers, and we're just looking to help people solve the complexities of the technology world, and just help them run their business and keep things moving.
Oh, awesome, man. Yeah, look, I think you're going to be very successful. I think the experience that you have is great. And again, just the way in which we got connected, I think your network of people are going to support you endlessly, which I'm excited about because it's obvious that you have soul and a mission to you. So like that, there's nothing more exciting than seeing somebody like that out there making a difference. So I appreciate you sharing your story and coming on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me, Tom. It's been a really fun chat today, and yeah. I think your whole tech shaman, is a great moniker, and we'll see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years, and how AI has changed everything, and maybe we'll chat again, and we can talk about what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Whatever's next in the tech world, but it's a
how wrong we were 5 years ago, right? I often find I'm reinventing myself. Yeah. But no, thank you to the listeners. Thank you for listening to Café Technika, where you can find out how people get into these positions, what gets them there, what drives them, how they operate. I think, we've learned a lot today with Colby, and I hope that you'll tune in for our next episode. And we're continually out there talking to folks and finding out what we can do to be better people and use technology in better ways. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next one.
Oops. Bye bye.